everyone, my name is Dr. Cristina Dominguez and I'm coming to you again with another episode of Level Up. This week we're talking about identity. When we identify ourselves, what is your first go-to? So for example, who are you? What's the first thing that came to mind? When I introduce myself and someone asks me, "Hi, how are you? What's your name?" "Oh, my name is Cristina Dominguez." "What do you do?" Instantly, the first question that we ask ourselves and that we ask someone else is, what do you do? How do you classify yourself? So that we can put ourselves into the box. It gives us a better understanding of where we should classify ourselves and others. But unfortunately, we're under the impression that we get a better understanding of ourselves and of others by classifying them into certain labels or categories or whatnot, but we really don't. So if I was to tell you, my name is Cristina Dominguez, I'm born and raised in Miami, I went to school in Orlando, I went to grad school in Tampa, I went to internship in Pennsylvania. My favorite color is purple, if you haven't figured it out by now. I'm a doctor by day, I'm a dancer by night. Do you have a better feel for who I am as a person by hearing that? Somewhat, but it's not enough to harbor trust. It's not enough to truly get to know who I am. I didn't share with you who I was. I just gave you my resume or my dating profile, one of the two. We are at a place that we have come so close and we've gotten so good at becoming more specific and becoming more inclusive about labels. We know how to identify our sexual orientation better, our gender, our race, our religion, our political affiliations, and that is how we identify ourselves. And yet, we still don't know who we are at the core. We are at an all-time high of anxiety, depression, and of people no longer wanting to live their lives. So how is it that we have gotten so much closer and so much better at expanding the boxes of classification of how we identify ourselves, but we are still so unsatisfied that we don't want to be here anymore? It's a really sensitive subject. It's allowing me to come to recognize that we truly don't know how to identify ourselves. Think about it. Especially now in Corona, I've really come to reflect on how it is that we have been placed in a vacuum in our homes, in our apartments, in quarantine. And we have been stripped of all of those checkboxes, of all of those categories, whether it's your job, or it's your profession, or it's your student status. All the things, particularly those of achievement, have been taken away. And now we're sitting in the silence. We are facing a blank slate of who we are without the things that we do. It's really rough. And I believe that's why a lot of us are having a hard time sitting at home doing nothing, because that's the very thing that defines us. So guess what? If we don't have those things that define us, we're having an identity crisis right now sitting at home in quarantine. As I've mentioned before, if you guys have been following me up until now, I love to look to nature for inspiration. And one thing that I've realized is that other creatures, other mammals don't put so much pressure on themselves to identify based off of what they do or the labels or their roles in life and society. When is the last time you've heard of a depressed or an anxious creature out in nature because of their lack of identity, not knowing who they are, or not feeling good enough? It doesn't exist out in nature. Creatures don't have that sense of ego that can't tolerate ambiguity. That's why we create these labels and these roles and the boxes. The boxes are intended to compartmentalize so that everybody fits somewhere, even if it's an other box. The other is the catch-all. When your demographic is not perceived as whatever enough, to be represented, then you have the catch-all box of the other. And what must that feel for that person? What about for the person that doesn't even have a box to represent them? You start feeling like a bit of an outsider. And when you're feeling like an outsider, you're feeling different. You feel like you don't fit in. And here's where the danger comes up. If there are boxes that we are socially expected to fit in, but there's none representing who we are, what we look like, then we're going to feel tempted to fit ourselves into a box. This is dangerous territory because now there's a disconnect between how we identify ourselves and who we truly are at the core. This is where anxiety lives. This is where depression lives. This is where lack of satisfaction, life satisfaction, because you're living a life that's not yours. Identity theft. That's the play on words that I'm using for this week in the title of this episode. Identity theft. When we feel different and we don't feel good enough, strong enough, pretty enough, fast enough, whatever enough, we take on and fit ourselves into a box that has been deemed, particularly socially, to be acceptable. And we just lost ourselves. It's very unfortunate. You see this a lot on social media. It has been such a beautiful creative outlet in so many ways. And at the same time, social media provides people with a platform to create this avatar, this image of who they want to be. And unfortunately, that's another disconnect because who you are projecting is not who you are. And it somewhat signifies that you're not happy with who you are. Knowing who you are means defining yourself based off of the things that can't be taken away from you. In my very first video, the self-exploration, the coronavirus edition, I encourage you and I take you on a journey through exploring, hey, everything was just stripped from us. Now what? We have been groomed and taught since grade school. If you remember the little homeworks with the fill in the blank, my name is blank. My favorite color is blank. Similarly to the way I just started the episode, we have been taught from a very early age to define ourselves based off of these very black and white concrete identifiers, characteristics that just sit on the surface. So what happens when those things are compromised? Even something that has to be defended when it's black or white, when it's dichotomous, there's just this or that. So for example, political affiliation, there's two main ones, and we're kind of expected to fit into the two. As of lately, there have been more options, but the majority is that there are two, dichotomous. And if you're not one, then you're the other. If you're not with us, you're against us. And this causes, that bipolarity causes the conflict. It means you have to be in constant defense of who you are to not feel as though your ego is dying. It's a self-preservation almost, where we have to be constantly defending ourselves, our political affiliations, our religious affiliation. If we don't have a job, then we have to make up for it in a different realm. Knowing who you are is the most crucial aspect of your mental wellness. One of my favorite influencers is Oprah. Always has been. I know it sounds cheesy, but that's my girl. I love her. And one of the most powerful quotes that I've heard her say is, if you don't know who you are before you become famous, then the fame will define you. That was so powerful to me, regardless of whether or not fame is in the cards for you. What it says to me is that if you don't know who you are and you have no foundation, you can't define yourself before you step into a given environment, the environment is going to define you, and then it'll be too late. Knowing who you are plays into all aspects of your life, particularly decision making. If you don't know who you are and you go into decision making situations, what are you making the decisions based off of? It's definitely not what you like, what you prefer, what you find important, because you don't know what those things are. This is a very difficult topic to explore. As a matter of fact, I had a really hard time coming up with how to deliver this message this week, because it's not something that's commonly advocated. It's not something that's discussed. If anything, we actually tend to turn away from talking about identity. And it's because we were not taught the proper way to define ourselves. So when we start to talk about it, you take away all the labels, then you're left with nothingness, and you're feeling vulnerable because you don't know where to go from there. It's scary because if it's a road you start going down and things are looking unfamiliar, if you're feeling kind of lost and disoriented, you're going to turn right back around and go where you came from where you know. It is not an easy path to take, but no, it is a very important one, because knowing who you are is going to frame your entire life. So how do we start to do this? Start by recognizing, like in situations like this, when we are not able to participate in the very things and the achievements, in the roles that we identify ourselves by, how do you feel? What is it like that you can't do anything? Sure, it feels really uncomfortable because you don't know where you're at. You don't know where you stand. Start to reflect on how you can define yourself in a way that's other than your achievements. And if just recognizing that you define yourself purely on your achievements, that's already progress. Because you're recognizing, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, if one day I don't have those things, then who am I? Identity crisis. If you're unhappy with yourself, it means that you're judging yourself. There must be something wrong. Is there something missing? I must not be enough of something. Not being satisfied with who you are means that there's judgment. And that's where things start to go south. That's where we take on other identities. We put on other masks that we believe are sufficient, are good enough, are strong enough, are powerful enough, because the person underneath it is broken. But guess what? At the end of the day, when that mask comes off, you have to look at you, your real self, in the mirror. So what is the solution here? I believe making best use of this opportunity with Corona and looking inside, as we explored in the first video, the self-exploration video, is probably one of the greatest gifts that you can provide yourself. Sitting and meditating. And no, it's not easy. I'm not going to sugarcoat it for you. You guys already know me. It is a challenging road, but it'll be one of the best decisions that you ever made. Because knowing who you are will influence the rest of your life. The decisions that you make, the roads that you take. And guess what? If you know who you are, then nobody else can tell you who you are. So just give it some thought, and then start to consider what might be a way for you to identify yourself that has more depth, that can't be compromised, that will stick with you forever regardless of the circumstances. Give it some thought, and as always, have a great week. Hey everyone, if you like this week's message on identity, please give it a thumbs up. For everyone that has subscribed up until this point, thank you so much for your support. If you're not already subscribed, please do so that you can keep up to date with the latest, and make sure to turn on those bell notifications so that you know when they're coming in. Have a wonderful week.